Good morning, everyone. We're just about to get started. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We'll be using Slido for questions today. If you haven't already signed in, it's very easy. Make sure you pick your room. We are in 17B, not 17A. They will get some pretty interesting questions in 17A if you start to pick the wrong room. I'm good. Awesome. And also, please do vote up the questions if you think they're interesting. That will help us up here determine which ones we want to ask. We have a ton of preset questions, but we do really want this to be an interactive session as much as possible. So to begin, thank you for joining us for the Future of Writing. I'm Nathan Schultz, the president at Chegg, Chegg.com. It's a real honor to be surrounded by three folks that are so passionate about the writing skill, a skill that we all think that is insanely critical for students to master as they transition from learning to earning. We all know the data about students leaving high school with some writing deficiencies, coming into college and trying to prepare them for a job, but even employers today are saying that students still are underprepared for writing, for basic communication. So it is a skill that we really need to tackle, and it's one that Chegg has taken on with full force, and I'm so happy to have some really great panelists up here to answer some tough questions today as we discuss the future of AI in writing instruction. All right, so let's go through the panelists quickly, and then we'll jump right into questions. To my right, I'm happy to introduce Elise Edmond Adol. She is the executive director of the National Writing Project, which is focused on our nation's educators and with efforts of improving writing and learning for all. To my left, first is Harry Denny, associate professor of English and director of the Writing Lab, or OWL, at Purdue University. And beyond him is Matthew Ramirez, co-founder of Write Lab and now the director of Writing AI at Chegg.com. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. All right. To jump right into it today, I'd like to start off with this question. Is writing, and why is writing so important? In a world where we have things like Microsoft Word, we have things like Grammarly, autocorrect, are you as educators overvaluing the importance of writing? Is it something of a lost art? And for that, I'd like to start with Harry, but obviously open it up from there.
Hey everyone, as a rhetoric professor, but also as someone who goes out across campus working with faculty out in the disciplines, I can tell you two things. Faculty are constantly complaining that students can't write, and then when I push them, they tell me, well, they can't write this, they can't write that, they can't write this. And when I push them a little bit further, their complaints range from understanding argument to understanding how you develop paragraphs, how you understand audience, how you think about genre, to a lot of sentence level issues. But oftentimes when faculty are complaining about writing and the state of writing, they too are confused. And I think that that's an interesting conversation that we can have in here if we'd like today.
Yeah, certainly would agree with that. I know that the history of complaining about the literacy skills of the younger generation is a very long history, and it has touched every development in technology from stone tablets through, et cetera, et cetera. So setting that aside, I think that, in fact, writing and tools like the ones that, they're not mentioned up there, but in your question, have perhaps contributed to undervaluing writing. So I just want to say a little bit about writing. Next to language itself, it's probably the most important tool that human beings have created, bar none. So if you take language and the importance of language in thought and communication, and then you understand that without writing, language only goes amongst those who are present. Writing gives us a chance to hold on to language, send it to people who are distant from the moment, let it accumulate over time. It travels, makes language travel, communication travel over time and space. So absolutely, writing is central to the development of science, to how bureaucracies run, to how businesses run, which is why employers are often complaining about it, how we do almost everything in more complex societies. And so it's vital to understand what writing is in its large accumulation. Technology gives us new media to make it. It gives us ways to make it multimodal, to make it audio, to bring in audio, to bring in photography and text. all together, vitally important. But at the center of almost everything we want young people to learn and do is the need to write in some way. And just to close and not go on a soapbox, which I obviously can, go on a soapbox about writing, to build on what Harry was saying, it's not simply the need for correctness, which is often what what your autocorrect or your Grammarly app, et cetera, are doing. They're fixing the correctness of language. And that's an important thing. We all want, we don't want an audience to look at our writing and say, you've lost all credibility with me because all the spelling, I don't think you know anything you're talking about. So we do want to get language and help young people get language correct. But it's actually the thinking that language helps us, that writing helps us do. We write in science and we learn to think like a scientist. Mm-hmm. We write an essay and we learn to think in a kind of inclusive, critical thinking, liberal arts way. We write humor and it teaches us something. So what writing does for the writer and what writing is a very complex and big map, and those correction apps focus us on only the surface level and not the deepness of writing.
Excellent, excellent. We all agree that writing is critical, yet the stats are telling us that there are issues with writing instruction, or at least the competency that students are coming away with. And as disruptors, we are always looking to leverage technology in ways to impact education. So I'll ask the next question. How will AI, which is really the focus of this panel, impact how humans learn writing? Let's time box this a little bit, because obviously, AI is a loaded word and it can go on forever. Say in the next 3 to 5 years, and I'll start with Matthew if I can.
So I think there are two parts to this. One is what AI enables, and then the other part is how we react to it and how we choose to interact with it. So on the AI side, it's already possible to generate coherent, full-length essays or news articles. Right? OpenAI came out with a model 2 weeks ago that did that, and they limited its use because they thought that it would be really dangerous for things like fake news. I think where we expect to see a lot of changes are in the research, the planning, and the drafting phases of writing. We expect that machines will be able to do a lot of pre-writing. Now, what does this mean for students who submit essays, right? Does that just enable them to cheat? I think it does if we keep essay assignments the way they are today, where it's something that they work on alone and they just submit this artifact to their teachers. But if it's something where this can be more interactive and we can leverage these kinds of tools in the classroom, really kind of an AI-assisted classroom, where we can use these things for research, because they can synthesize millions of articles, more than certainly a student can read over the course of a semester, but more than most people will read over the course of their lives, where we can start to focus on students being able to evaluate the quality of information, and then take some of the best of these ideas and items and filter it through their own intelligence and experience so that they can produce something that is genuinely their own.
So I would like to try and change that question a bit and bring it over to Harry, who obviously is dealing a lot with writing instruction. What concerns do you have? I mean, obviously AI is promising a lot, but it also could negatively impact writing instruction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think if students get too overly dependent on AI or apps to drive what it is that they want to develop, sometimes they forget that a critical dimension of developing an essay or developing writing is understanding audience and understanding disciplinarity. So when you're at a school like Purdue, on any given day we can be working with students who are writing papers for an engineering class, to a pharmacy class, to a philosophy class, to the arts. And each of those ways of writing don't have just one right way to do it. They need to think about how they write to a particular audience. I think of one genre that my students struggle with constantly just within rhetoric, and that is the notion of a lit review. So how do you take a bunch of scholarship and package that in a new way that shows you have something new to say? And at this point, I haven't seen a whole lot of technology that can get students thinking expansively and get students thinking outside their heads and think about what is the context, what is the rhetorical purpose, what is the outlet for the messages that they want to develop.
Yeah. My organization has educators from K through university. So to take even that longer view, I think one of the things that they would say is the biggest challenge to teaching writing well for those educators who are focused on teaching writing well. Writing is often neglected in K-12 anyway, so I wouldn't say that's every teacher. But one of the challenges is the way that school, as an institution, and it could be our companies as well, develop assignments that are almost dummy routines. They're not real. They're not deeply real for the writer. They're often something that the teacher knows more about than the writer knows. For example, you assign an essay topic, you know an excellent answer to that. You've assigned it as a question, and your grading is dependent in some ways on how close that student gets to what's in your head, which is the exact opposite of what happens in real writing. You go read something because you hope to find an author who knows more about it than you. You don't pick up a magazine to grade the inadequacy of the piece. You're wanting to learn something. So a real writing relationship between a writer and a reader is very much dependent on sort of a writer getting into a topic, following it deeply, writing something compelling that an audience wants to read. But school keeps us quickly producing a product called text to turn in very quickly again and again for a grade. So tools that might in fact help us produce text as product, like a fast food approach, might in fact be very appealing to young people who simply want to get through their courses, get their grades accumulated, get their credits, and then go on and do something real after school. And they may not really have learned to write because they may not have been doing, let's say, real writing in school when they're surrounded by people who could mentor and help them. So a lot of that goes back to the assignment. A lot of that goes back to the question of whether young people have the time and space in school to follow an interest, to really produce something powerful and get feedback from those around them. And sometimes when we pitch technology solutions to someone's problem, what it does is reinforce that the problem, like how do I get more productivity and accumulate more credits quickly, is the problem that the user is supposed to solve. So how can we disrupt that? That's a question, I think, for anyone working on ed tech.
Awesome. And so we'll take that first question up there, and I think it's a good time to kind of spice that into two. When we'll start with the latter part, because you kind of touched on it, where there's great tools out there, but it's maybe not teaching writing, or it's not getting students to proficiency. So from your point, at least, what part of the human element will always be needed in writing instruction? If you could expand on that a little bit. Is that just the teacher itself, or do you think more?
Oh, I think more. I think absolutely the teacher, of course, and then the community of writers that teachers create in the classroom. That's sort of absolutely a given. But one of the beauties about what tools let us do now that we couldn't do, just a few decades ago, is actually have our written products or media products meet ever more distant audiences. That the internet lets us do that. How to write for ever more distant audiences is like a core piece in writing instruction. How to understand what they made of our text, how to work with them, how to take feedback from them, how to write for a bigger and bigger view. That's one beautiful example of where technology can really superpower writing instruction.
Absolutely. And Matthew, as you think about it, I saw another question come in that I thought was really interesting, which ties to the first part of this, where it said, will AI be able to really step out of just a grammar application, but move into something that's really around the big concepts of writing or themes of writing? And this question around what's the biggest advancements that you see in writing technology, you could kind of think about those together. How would you respond?
Yeah, so I think it certainly can move into the bigger themes of writing. The question is whether we want it to be in a way where we're learning or we're just accepting whatever a system produces. Before I went into education technology, I was a writing instructor at Berkeley, and I was amazed at how students were expected to know things that they had never been actually trained to know, and then we automatically had to move them towards more complex assignments, and everything always seemed rushed. So if we stay in that mindset where there are just a few things where students have to just pass their courses, then I think we're at a great risk of AI just supplying them with solutions and with papers and things like that. But if we can make it so that there are very discrete skills that students need to learn and demonstrate proficiency in, then I think there's an opportunity to leverage AI for its time-saving abilities, for teachers to be really a vital role in developing it. And for me, that was a huge part of going into EdTech, is I knew that this was going to come, so it might as well be a writing instructor and a team of writing instructors that would actually work to shape it in a way that we found pedagogically sound. At Chegg, we work to start where students are able and try to help them see possibilities for themselves at every step in the writing process. But this requires a very delicate balance with the expertise of teachers, so that we can understand how do we get students to a place where they are appreciating what they're learning, internalizing what they're learning, and are going to be able to apply it in their lives going forward.
Excellent, excellent. So we've clearly established the role of AI. There is a role in the future of writing instruction for AI. The teacher is not something that will ever go away, and we're all very thankful for that. But Harry, putting your hat on for a second, there are a number of companies coming out with these applications. They've been around for a while. How do you think about that? And Elise, I'd love to also hear from you on this. How do you think about weaving that and the technology that's coming out from it into traditional instruction? How will teachers, get the training necessary to really take advantage of these tools?
Well, the last part of that question, I think, is a question I see from my standpoint as often a crisis. That teachers of writing or faculty that are using writing to learn are in a pickle in most places around the country, that they are asked to use writing to deliver instruction or to assess instruction, but don't really have a lot of background in the teaching of writing. And so they get very frustrated with what the students are producing, and they get very frustrated with the resources that they have available to them. And fortunately, there's units like my own, a writing lab, or writing across the curriculum programs that can support them. But a lot of times that technology element is sort of a symptom of a larger problem with how well teachers are prepared to step into the dynamic.
Right. So teachers are rarely actually prepared to teach writing. Almost every state in our nation has one or more courses required in teaching reading, and virtually none in the teaching of writing, which reflects a kind of historic imbalance between those two, because you actually don't have anything to read unless somebody writes it, so actually we'd like them to be in combination. And then unprepared teachers who haven't been prepared to teach writing, go into schools with traditional instruction, which actually doesn't really work all that well. And in fact, they may be bringing zombie ideas about the teaching of writing from their own experience in college, for example, where they may not have had effective writing instruction throughout their college years. So just saying how do teachers integrate new tools into their teaching is not a good question to ask, because teachers, in fact, may be, as a market in some places, saying things like, and we know this from surveys, things like, wow, if you could help me get the papers graded, because one of the reasons I don't ask kids to write is that there's a lot of grading, and if you could help me with the grading, then maybe I would assign more writing. That's a really bad piece of market advice to take if you want to improve instruction, because grading doesn't actually improve writing. Feedback improves writing, but grading not so much. So what happens when we use, for example, these tools in order to more effectively grade writing without any thought to the assignments, to the community, to the feedback? And does that, in fact, export to the machine, let's say, exactly what you need from the teacher, and the community, which is reading the work all along and giving feedback about it, because, in fact, this thing's going to take care of the essential thing, which is the grade. So I think one of our challenges, absolutely, as the head of a professional development organization, teachers need opportunities to write themselves, learn from their own writing, to learn about teaching writing, to read the research in teaching writing. Absolutely, that should be happening for all teachers. But the market and product development loop that may in fact require developers to move off of the great instincts that Matthew was talking about, where you're saying basically, don't we want great writing teachers creating the product? We do.
Right.
Where will they get the time and space and support to actually create the product that fits what we know about the most effective writing instruction, as opposed to the thing that's going to go quickly to market because the market says, I need a grading tool. So I think that's a conundrum for all of us on both sides of the teaching and product development equation.
Interesting. Well, and speaking about the resources, obviously the next question up here, I'd like to, from the crowd, I'd like to read. So what are some of the digital resources available to help students in the drafting and controlling of ideas and thesis around the writing works that you guys use today, or maybe helping teachers understand?
I would almost want to push that question a little bit further back in the process. And when I work with students, I want to figure out what are their learning styles. We often, too often, assume everyone is a textual learner, or people don't need talk in order to produce writing. Or we every once in a while in the writing lab will have students who are very visual learners. And so we have whiteboards all over the writing center trying to figure out how it is that somebody wants to develop an argument, how they want to fit a context and what have you. So that whole notion of where do we begin with this, often sometimes I think requires a little bit of conversation with a particular student or a group of students to think about what their learning needs are. But once they're going, there's any number of techniques that you can use. I love, in the writing lab, just having a student sit at their laptop and write for a little while. I will model that with them, and I will write with them. Because once again, we don't provide students time where we value the actual process of writing, the actual practice of writing. Sometimes we'll use Google Docs, we'll use shared platforms so that you can be on the document with the student at the same time, and that can be really helpful.
Any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that when you think about, there's a gazillion wonderful things out there. Every writer would say that there are many things that he or she will use in order to write better. So I think the first question is the tool serving the writer, or is the tool serving the teacher and the teaching context? And both can be beneficial. If you think about what writers value, young and old, they're often valuing something that automates a simple process, let's say, or makes easier the kind of processes that they go through, like typically writers are doing research. How do you hold on to the pieces that you want to use in your research? How do you make a bibliography? You don't want to spend a lot of time on that. That can be nicely automated. How do you, in fact, do markup and annotation and proofreading? How do you invite other people into your document? What if all those things were in one place? There are tools that are now increasingly saying, here's your writing space. You can annotate your documents, hold on to your documents, have interaction with people giving you feedback all in the same place. Well, that helps somebody with the task of just holding on to all of your stuff. Writers often like that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Which is a whole different area than what teachers often might want, which is something like, who among my writers hasn't even gotten started yet, and there's not a lot of time till the thing is due? Can you give me those names so I can get to them more quickly? So there's a lot of tools that can fit either the writer for benefit to the writer or benefit to the teacher, and I think that's the first question.
Absolutely. So, building on that a little bit, Harry, obviously as the director of the OWL, and from Chegg's perspective, we recently signed an amazing partnership with the OWL and really helping us build out our writing AI and our writing tech. And for the entrepreneurs and ed techers in the audience, what do you think about all these companies coming to people like yourself and other educators to receive that level of support to make sure we build the best writing tools? And how do you think about us working with organizations like yourself?
It's great. I mean, I think that, one of the things that I'm most proud of coming into Purdue is recognizing that I'm stepping into a writing lab that has 40-some years of history, working with students one-to-one for, multiple appointments, face-to-face, online, you name it. But then we have this great resource that grew out of all that one-to-one teaching. Right. So we have this amazing resource that back in the day was literally handouts on a wall and became virtual when the internet rolled around. But we're really proud that we have really good content, and sometimes we are thinking about, and I think companies like your own help us think more imaginatively about how we can deliver that content to a wider range of audiences. So I think it's a nice synergy there.
And Matthew, obviously you come with a long writing background, but you moved into the ed tech space and took a more entrepreneurial path around that. What are you so excited about now that we're going to be working with Purdue and the OWL?
I mean, I think there's an opportunity to provide a lot of high quality content, explanations, examples around the technology we build. And some of the things that we're working on are helping students with their thesis statements, helping students find evidence effectively, and to be able to have this pedagogical framework that's not only vetted, but revised over and over and over again over the last 20 years. I think that's an amazing opportunity for students to learn at a really high level.
Awesome, awesome. All right, returning to some of the audience questions now, and having just finished a book on the death of the 5-paragraph essay, so I was happy to see this one. Yeah, I mean, with the rigorous expectations on college-level writing exams, really, is there any benefit left to the 5-paragraph essay? And I'll let all you guys start, right? But it's definitely an interesting topic.
You may want to put your helmet on.
Yeah, yeah, that book I read was pretty interesting. That's for sure.
So, okay, if you're an educator, you know, like this is a super hot topic right here, getting into the 5-paragraph essay. You might imagine, and it would be true, that the National Writing Project is not a fan of the 5-paragraph essay. But the reason for that, we actually are not opposed to essays that happen to be 5 paragraphs, any more than we are to essays that happen to be any number of paragraphs, so that's fine. The 5-paragraph essay, if you don't know it, is a formula for what you would do in an introduction, 3 body paragraphs that generally follow a particular pattern, and then a conclusion that follows a particular pattern. People who are proponents of it, in a limited way, would say it's a useful format in the same way that like training exercises might be in skating, a kind of format that will teach you a certain skill, especially of thesis and support, for example, this logical notion, which is great for upper elementary and into middle school. Young people kind of are ready for thinking about thesis and support. So it's a training exercise. Unfortunately, it acquires a status of what college writing is, which it is not. It acquires a status of the formula of what is an essay, like that defines what essay is, which it is not. And when students do it, and do a lot of it, it narrows their vision for what writing could be in their own thinking. And it tricks them into things like trying to find 3 support ideas for a thesis, regardless of whether you've thought through the topic or approached it in any particular way. Also encourages formulaic language. I read so many student essays in assessment, not like a machine might read millions, but I might be in an assessment context reading, let's say, thousands and thousands in a scoring thing. And you get openings like, in today's modern society, the problem we all face is slot in topic. The first reason I think that, the second reason I think that, the third reason I think that, essay done, and why isn't that an A? So it teaches us that the formula is the point and not the thinking is the point.
Right.
That's, again, not about 5 paragraphs or about topics that are organized. It's about the status that we give the 5-paragraph essay in American education. So we're sort of we find it problematic.
Can understand. Harry, any
I would
thoughts?
just add that it haunts us every day in any number of ways. Right now we're in admissions season for grad programs at Purdue, and one of my biggest frustrations is seeing, even for grad applications, statements of study, personal statements, people using the 5-paragraph essay to kind of hinder their voice and hinder their perspective. And so you have people who are graduating from undergrad, trying to get into master's and doctoral programs, who are using this template that inhibits what they have to say, inhibits their voice, inhibits their perspective. And I like how Elise said it. It's just limiting. I totally get its value from having sat through SAT readings and
Beautiful.
GRE and you name it. The sad part is the 5-paragraph essay teaches to the mean and not to the potential. And you know, as we sit for those exams, I think the most frustrating part is wanting to scream out to both the student and to the teacher, you're marking yourself as a canned essay. And that canned essay almost always, depending on how you play with the language and the rhetoric and the structure, limits your potential. You know, so if you're aspiring for a 6 on an SAT, it's almost always going to get you a 4.
Right.
Just because we can smell that canned essay a mile away. And it actually will hurt people.
Sorry.
Not to belabor the
No,
5-paragraph
please,
essay,
please.
which you all brought up, someone out there brought up, but The other thing is, I think what you see as you go through the levels is that there are educators who are teaching it because they think that's what the next level requires. When you take it, and probably some of you are teachers in the audience, when you take home a bunch of 5-paragraph essays on the same topic by number whatever, 15 or 20, you're ready to actually just like end it all that night rather than keep reading these formulaic things. But you do it because you hear they're going to ask for this in middle school. And in middle school, I don't know, your high school teachers are going to require you to know to be able to do that. And high school teachers are like freshman comp, you're going to have to do this for your college teachers. So we actually have to explode the myth at all of those levels, because very hardworking people who are trying to do the best by their young people are focusing on that format because of the myth that that's what is required.
Awesome. I want to return back to the AI part of the discussion, and I've seen a couple questions come in. One, Matthew, was around AI and creative writing, and really, are those two kind of at opposites to each other? And we can talk about that. And then obviously there's some questions around, what would AI help students actually find and evaluate? What evidence would it look like? So if you can kind of talk a little bit more about that and then get some discussion going, great.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with an analogy. So in music, a lot of people are using AI to generate sound bits or sections of music. And they're professional musicians, but it's just sort of a way of brainstorming and looking at, how does this sound? How is this? Can I incorporate this? Can I modify this? And I think there's a similar opportunity with AI in writing, where you can look at, okay, what's the output here? If I control it, if I have a level of control where I'm inputting topics, if I'm inputting style parameters, if I'm inputting these things, can I look at what it produces and say, I kind of like that, but I'm going to modify it in this way? It can become a really interactive tool. Obviously, it's not creative writing if it's just producing something for you and then you're submitting that as your own. But I think for the tinkerer, there's a huge opportunity to use these systems to modify slight parameters and hone your own creative voice.
Do you see a future where these machines can do all the writing for us and writing becomes a quaint little function?
I think it can, right? Like, we're actually at that point today where we could say, okay, it's producing something that's mostly coherent, so I guess we're done, we don't need to write anymore. But that's not aspirational at all, right? Like, if we have a lot of communication needs, and as we've seen with lots of other innovations, not only in software, when machines take on some kind of function, we get a little bit bored and we raise the bar and we raise the standards and we want to do more things and we want more toys, basically. So I think that sort of aspirational attitude is what is going to keep that from becoming just a quaint function.
That's excellent. Thoughts?
I like that. We like more toys. I like that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
We all do.
It's true.
Short stories are toys, right?
It's true. I liked your analogy too. We, in the National Writing Project, we are often surveying ourselves. Teachers often, we're teachers who like tech, and we do a lot of sort of surveys of these great writing teachers. What would you want? If somebody were to make you a tech tool, what would it be? So thinking about what AI could do for these great writing teachers, they will say things like, and again, they're not experts, but they'll say things like, I read so many dull openings, like the Today's Modern Society dull opening. I would love it if a tool could just like at some point nudge a writer and say, you might want to look at some other ways that you could open your essay. Here are a couple of examples. And the machine would know, in effect, who needs to be fed those examples. Teachers could help put those examples in, but of course, once the machine is trained, it can look for others. Right. And it could just open up, kind of like your example, I think, in music. Here at a moment when you're drafting, here are some other things you might think about as a way to open your paper, something like that. Teachers ask for that kind of thing a lot. Or teachers ask for, when they have large numbers of young people who are writing across different places, how could a machine help my writer find writers who are looking at the same topic if they're writing together in an online community, because maybe they want to give each other feedback because they're on to kind of the same thing. These are things that are really hard for teachers to do when you have lots and lots of students maybe distributed over a wide range. So to me, they seem classic things where AI could help. And they're very different. AI can also help with correctness and things like that, absolutely. But they're different than following that track.
Yeah, absolutely. Please
I
do.
think Matthew said something that was really brilliant, and that is that we don't allow students enough space, whether it's in our classrooms, or whether it's in writing centers, whether it's in their residence halls where they're actually producing their writing. We don't allow them enough space to play, to improv, to riff. And it would be amazing to see AI that provided a space for students to have a playful relationship with writing. I'm sure all of you who are teachers out there also see this. Students have this very high stakes, stressful relationship with writing, I would say about 80% of the time, at least in higher ed. And there's not enough play. There's not enough space for revision, for reimagining, rethinking how they are producing writing. Granted, there are the students who start their projects 2 hours before they're due, but for those who start a little bit sooner than that, there's this space for revision that I think is something that, particularly for students and faculty that are trying to work through how we develop and how we refine our ideas, is a really lost space. And I wish AI could have a space for that, for iterative writing, if that makes any sense.
It's also the bringing up play, which is so important both for writing and for learning new tech tools, right? The play gives you a low barrier of entry opportunity to learn how to do new things. We've confined this conversation very much to writing in academic, and you could theorize workplace settings. But the same young person who's extremely stressed about academic writing and finds that challenging could also, in his or her play life, as a poet or an artist or someone who's spending a lot of time on social media doing a project or something outside of school, is maybe writing a huge amount. And we often see that those young people will define that as not writing. Like they'll say, I really don't write. I don't write very much. I can't remember the last time I've really written something. Of course, the person's a slam poet. They've been both not only doing poetry, but also learning iteration and practice and performance in spare time. So the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind as we're creating tools is this in-school and workplace, out-of-school and workplace, because some of the most engaging things for any writer to work with are in the consumer out-of-school space. And that's where a lot of learning and writing practice happens, but we kind of define it as not writing because it's not essay writing.
It's not being
for school.
graded, right? Exactly. And Harry, keeping your writing center hat on and the wonderful tutors, writing instructors you have at the OWL, and taking technology out of the equation just for a moment. This question from the audience: Do you think teaching students to organize their thoughts using pen and paper to write still really has value?
Yeah, I mean, we do. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what techniques you guys use at the OWL to get those themes and ideas out of students.
Yeah, pen and paper definitely has a place. I think one thing that we often joke about in the writing lab is that people walk in and they see these sheets of yellow or white paper and think, what do you do with this? Because people are so used to composing on their laptops or their tablets these days. But I would say 80% of the time when a student comes into the writing lab or any writing center around the country is there's a talking aloud protocol. Just tell me what you're thinking about. Let's see if we can understand the professor's assignment. What is it that you want to say about this? Can you imagine what the audience is? Just the other day we had a whole meeting about dealing with conflict when that arises in the writing center. A lot of times students will come in with pretty controversial topics and not know that, oh, there might be other people that don't think like me. So that you spend a lot of time in a writing center just getting people out of their heads and imagining the wider world out there and the arena into which they're going to put their ideas.
Additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, we get that question because we do a lot with digital writing, and people will say, I'm in Berkeley, so people will say, it's all digital, right? We don't need paper anymore. And I'm always amused when you go into, let's say, the most high-tech engineering-driven company and go into like a design space. You've seen pictures of them or you've been in them. The walls are covered with Post-it notes, chart paper. You get a bunch of mathematicians together. As soon as they're talking about some problem, they rush to the chalkboard and they start drawing by hand on the chalkboard. There's no evidence that paper chalkboard, et cetera, is any less useful
Right,
now
right,
to
yeah.
people who are even doing high-end digital work than it ever was. So hold on to your Moleskines and your favorite pens, and it has to be this big, and
Right.
it has to have a certain feel to it. Hold on to all of that stuff. It's still completely relevant.
And I think this leads into the next question. Given that, obviously writing instruction does need to change for the jobs of tomorrow and the environments we're going to be all working in. And I think this question is interesting. Given all writing requires clarity of thought and expression, do you think there's a specific type of writing style or form that seems more important to be teaching right now and for students to understand right now as they continue on their path from learning to earning? That's open for the table.
That's a really hard question.
Well, that's why 6 people liked it up there.
I would say, we've already in this room killed off the 5-paragraph essay.
Well, we'll replace it.
Back in West Lafayette, they're dancing. But what we see, and again, Purdue is a STEM school, but we see a lot of people struggling with the movement from their liberal arts classes and doing expository writing into broadly defined tech writing, broadly defined lab writing, broadly defined disciplinary writing. So when I think of that question, what is a form that we should all be teaching? I want to hedge on that only for the reason that students, particularly at a university, go out and interact with so many different disciplines that I'd worry that I don't want to kill off the 5-paragraph essay and resurrect it with something else. But I would think that we would really need to do a lot of work, particularly if we're based in the humanities, thinking about how our students in the social sciences, the hard sciences, the professions take up writing, and how do we create a space for writing the disciplines that is complementing, not competing with writing in the first year or in the humanities sort of context.
Yeah, I think actually, rather than thinking about forms, I agree with what you said. There are some dispositions that I think are more important and more critical to where writing is going. Like the dispositions, certainly the dispositions of writing and taking feedback and building toward an audience and purpose, but also the disposition to study what's being required in a writing situation, the flexibility that's required to adapt to new circumstances. So I think there are a lot of dispositions that are important. And then I do think there is some new content. So we would suggest that writing is on a trajectory to create either new forms or new contexts for old forms that really do represent something new that needs to be taught. For example, so much that young people are going to be asked to write in the work world might actually appear on a website or on social media that will suggest a certain length and reading habit. Also has to be written so that algorithmically it can be displayed in multiple places. So if you think about, for example, the classic essay, which will be published as a standalone piece where you can control the reader moving from the beginning to the end. And then imagine what happens if a piece of content, rather than being like that, is going to show up here next to ads, there in whatever order, that people will click on it or move through it in whatever they want, because that's how readers operate on the web. How do you think about organization, let's say, when the writing you're producing is going to be distributed through social media? Are there new tips that are quite different than sort of that leisurely liberal arts, I will walk my way up to my main point after a few paragraphs, when we know that in fact somebody's like done with you. You're right now too long, didn't read by the time you even announce what the topic is. So studying new forms and how writing is circulated and distributed, those are kinds of new pieces of content for the writing classroom, I think.
Can I add to that? I love what Lisa's saying there. We are seeing more and more in the writing lab students coming in with a need for multimodal writing, but also when they're entering into the job market, imagining how they translate, for lack of a better term, resumes or CVs into video. So thinking about, how do you present self in a variety of sorts of ways. And then the third thing that we constantly see at Purdue, whether it is first-gen students or international students, is thinking about how they balance their own rights, their own language, to their own vernaculars, but also understanding that you enter into a world that may not have respect for multilingualism or multi-vernacular ways of expression. And so how do you coach students to understand that they can code mesh, but also code switch as they move across disciplines, but also employment opportunities?
Awesome. And I love that you brought up people walking into the writing lab. Unfortunately, not every student has that ability, especially on the community college campuses, especially as more programs move online, be that at the school themselves or an OPM bringing these programs online. Let's talk a little bit about what we think writing support looks like in an online world and in online courses. Obviously, Matthew, love at the end of that, bring in some of your technology expertise, maybe some of the reasons you founded Write Lab in the beginning. But for Harry and Elise, I mean, where do you see online instruction going when the teacher can't sit there and get the pen and paper out with the student?
Oh, did you want to start with Matthew?
Sure. I mean, I think what I saw when I was a tutor at a writing lab was that there weren't that many students there until peak times, and then everybody was there, and then you had a staffing problem, right? So you didn't have this sort of supply on demand that students really needed. Also, since students were often writing their papers at the last minute, they needed support at all hours, right? They need support in the middle of the night. They need support when there are not very many people available to support them. So that was something that was very appealing about online. Like, can we make it so that students can maintain the same quality, get the same quality, but from a tutor that's online or from some tools that are online, but still get the things that are not available online from the teacher when they need to get them. So, I mean, those are challenges that we continue to face. I think we're doing a lot to address that. I think Purdue is helping us address a lot of those issues, but there's still a lot of challenges.
I would just add to that I think it's an amazing question to think about how we deliver service where students are. On our campus with 45,000 students, we see a small fraction of that. We're proud of the impact on that fraction, but we've done a lot of research on where students are, and we're trying to figure out where students write. And oftentimes, where students write, those hot spots on campus, are very rarely anywhere near the English building. They are often, in our co-rec, our athletic building. They're writing at coffee houses and whatnot. And we're trying to move towards having more and more, rather than face-to-face sessions, online sessions where people can upload papers, they can go into a chat room and share writing. The tricky part is the logistical part, and I think that we are still working to figure that out, and I think there's a lot of great platforms and vendors that support that, but that's, that becomes a question of institutional, if not personal privilege. Do you have the economic or financial resources to access things that are, kind of more broadly online?
Yeah, we're also thinking at the National Writing Project about how we act on connected learning. This notion that if you follow the learner and where the learner is following his or her interests and desiring to learn, use the open web as a learning platform. How do you kind of serve up learning opportunities to young people, whether they're in school or not? So just to add to what was said, to take it out of the teacher, a lot of young people are looking for mentors in something that they want to do. Just going back to, for example, poetry, the opportunity to find and watch video, which might be tutorial or just performance from people you're trying to learn from and study in terms of style, et cetera. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful way to learn. And it's probably happening at something like 10:30 at night at home. So in addition to the question of how do we open up access, which absolutely is an equity issue for young people, to conscious learning environments, how can these tools actually help us create an ecosystem of learning environments that can serve young people, whether they're in a school situation or not, whether they're in college or not, whether they're in K-12 or not. Those might be some really powerful places. They are 24/7. They're filled with learning assets. Those learning assets are not organized and not easily delivered to a learner, and they often are not going to add up in the, to something that's going to get them advancement or credit or opportunity. So solving that ecosystem learning environment, I think all of these tools can be really powerful in that space, and it won't necessarily look like the tool you would create for an educational setting. It's going to look like a tool that's going to attract a learner who has a passion about something, but could be badged or micro-credentialed, could be offered up new learning opportunities, and that could be in the writing and media creation space for sure, for a lot of young people who want to do writing and media creation.
One thing that I think of when I hear, online delivery of tutoring instruction is thinking about how I would love to see the OWL grow to this creature that when a student goes on to the OWL at 3 in the morning, rather than having it be this static creature, that we create a space where, I don't know if you ever go on to Verizon or any number of these sites where a little person pops up and asks you, hey, how can I help you? It would be kind of cool to see a virtual tutor that could help people use that site. Right now, I think one of our concerns as a website is thinking about how do we make it more interactive? How do we make it more dynamic? Our content presumes that people know where to look for the information. And it would be wonderful to have AI that would guide people to what they need based on the questions that they're asking.
Well, we definitely agree. We see lots of traffic on our site at about 3 a.m. in the morning as students try to get their work done. And it really has been spurred on by what I would consider a self-directed education revolution by students, which is wonderful. But obviously the audience is wondering, what are good texts, what are good resources that can help students that are self-directed become better writers on their own?
Ably predicted, and especially so that those of us who are teaching writing teach from an actual understanding of what the thing is that we're teaching. A lot of zombie ideas in writing would be dispensed if we really understood our own writing practice and said, why would anybody do that? That's ridiculous. I wouldn't do that as a writer. But if you're a self-directed learner, I think building on what you were just sharing, one is really making the practice of looking at beautiful examples of the thing you're trying to write. And if they can be found through the open web, that's great. If we can collect them better for learners and deliver them up, that's even better. That's where technology could help us. And if they can be unpacked, that would be fabulous. There are writers who write about how to be a better writer in a given field. Science is a perfect example of this. There are great pieces by scientists about how to write science better because it's not well written. Mm-hmm. So you could discover those and learn from the people who practice the art. That's also a great thing. And then I think the other piece for the self-directed learner, there's nothing like a kind of response group, which could be face-to-face or could be through sharing with Google Docs, that kind of thing. But one of the most important things for anybody who's and by writing I mean also media creation at the same time, you have to understand how the thing you are putting out into the world comes across to an audience. You know what you intend to say or demonstrate or what you think that effect in your video is going to produce. But the goal is to see what happens in the mind of the receiver of that thing. And a response group, feedback from people who will read or view or interact with your stuff, that just lets you see, wow, I thought that was a hysterical opening joke, but nobody got it. Or what do you mean you didn't understand that the transition from this to this meant blah, blah, blah? That's what you need. And then you need to come back to your own product and see it through the eyes of the audience. And that requires practice. Listening to people, not just your friends, but listening to people, taking feedback. And if you can find mentors who understand the task that you're trying to do, another thing technology can help us do, that's also a fabulous thing. And self-directed learners, if we can help them find those, I think this is another kind of place where privilege operates, where people from privileged settings are surrounded by adults and mentors that can help that happen. And young people in places where that's not so easy are much left to their own resources, even when in fact they're capable of engaging in the same processes and learning in the same way.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're coming to an end. Before too many people run out of the room, I do want to get this last question out to the panelists here. And what happens to us if we lose this art form, right? How will it not only affect us as a society, but also how we learn? Right? It's a big question, but it is an art form that needs to stay around for forever, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
What happens if we lose it?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that, for some historical reasons, we've lost part of it, right? I think with a lot of standardization. You know, students used to learn a much more complex variety of writing mechanisms, right? They used to learn 400 figures of rhetoric. They used to learn, alongside learning Latin and Greek, and they used to learn how to not only write, but also orate. They used to have to deliver all of these different mechanisms in real time. They used to have to learn how to improvise communication. You know, there are a lot of executives that brag about their storytelling, but in all honesty, they're really nothing compared to the abilities of like a Demosthenes or one of these who could just on the spot deliver something extremely complex and amusing and intellectual. So I think there's part of the art we should think about whether we want to recover. And then for what remains of it, I think, you know, we have to, as I said, take a very active role in understanding how students are engaging with their writing, how they're feeling about their assignments, whether or not they're actually able to see a way into a particular assignment. Like, does it reflect their own intelligence and experience? Because if it doesn't, those students are much more likely to plagiarize, right? If you can't find a way into an assignment, you have a complete mind block, right? You have a lot of negative feelings. And so I think, as Harry mentioned, one of the great ways we can deal with this is to write alongside students, right? And in software development, you call it pair programming. You sit next to another programmer and you write alongside each other, and it's a wonderful experience. It's slower, right? There's a scale problem, but the quality is just amazing. So I think even little bits of that, to even show students that kind of collaboration is even possible, and that they deserve that kind of attention, I think can go a long way.
And I would just add that I'm always struck by this question of, you know, is writing going away just at the moment when more and more people are getting more access to writing? You know, so I think that one of the great moments about technology today is that we are addressing a social justice issue in this country, if not this world, through technology. That people are writing more and more today, are having greater and greater access to writing. And so I think we have to validate and value writing wherever it's happening, but also be very aware that when we go down these roads of trying to police writing, almost always that's about policing who is getting to have a voice and who is getting to express themselves and who gets to work with those folks. You know, so all of us in the world of writing centers and writing labs are very mindful of who is in our spaces and who do we value and who do we support, but also who do we give space to express themselves. And so I'm fearful that we go down this road of imagining writing disappearing, because that's precisely the moment when the people who most need a voice, most need expression, are going to be once again shut down.
Right now, more people write and publish publicly than ever before in history. Not because there are simply more people, which there are, so it's not that. It's that if we think about Twitter, if we think about a Facebook post, if we think about text, more people are using text to communicate than ever in history. We don't necessarily think about that as writing, but I think an interesting thing that's happening right now is we're seeing the potential issues in society that we're all talking about now that are connected with that mass publication. And we are only in the first 30 years of an internet revolution. We are sort of at the moment right after Gutenberg, right? We have not learned yet how to manage this massive participation through writing that is global right now in a way that produces a quality of life, a sense of, you know, human positive becoming. I'm going to sound woo-woo. I don't just put your favorite woo-woo kinds of things in it. But if we're going to harness this amazing participation in writing, it means that that large participation has to take writing more seriously. So I kind of like this thread that started with Matthew. It's not that it will disappear. The problem, the challenge, because text is going to power text is huge. Text powers a lot of the technology. It requires text. It's a beast that requires text put into it. So it's not likely that writing will disappear. It's likely, not likely, it's possible that we forget the significance of writing and we don't endow it with the qualities of voice and critical thinking and need to actually understand ourselves as human beings, that we let that part slip away and that we have as writing without writers. That would be my worry.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let me thank you, the audience, for joining us today on this exciting topic and posting some questions. And thank you to the panelists for participating.
Thank you.